Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Organizational Network Analysis webinar. My name is Justin Warner, and I will be the host of today's webinar. Today, I am joined by Dr. Beth Wilkins, a principal consultant here at DecisionWise, and Mr. Christian Nielson, Vice President for Consulting here at DecisionWise. Beth and Christian, thank you so much for taking time to be with us today.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right, great. We're really excited to have you be a part of this. We're excited to talk about this subject on organizational network analysis. There's some really neat things that we found on with our research with this and where we're headed with this. So, Beth, before I just ramble on, why don't you take a minute and tell our audience a little bit about you, for one, and how you got interested in organizational network analysis and how we're applying this here at DecisionWise.
Sure. So my expertise is transformation, helping people, individuals, and organizations with sustainable transformation. I worked at Oracle for about 10 years, and I was there during a really acquisitive period. We did about 65 acquisitions while I was there. And one of the things we realized very quickly is that you can bring in all this intellectual property, but unless you actually tap into those people and get them to collaborate and share information, that wasn't a very good investment. I started thinking of it like buying books. You buy a bunch of books that you think are going to be great, and then you don't crack them open and read them. Mm-hmm. So we started working with the person I think is the father of org network analysis. His name's Rob Cross. And at that time, he was a professor at the University of Virginia. And he helped us understand how we could analyze our organization and see who from these acquisitions the key influencers were. Well, this was very helpful. I was helping with strategy, change management, and talent development. And so we needed to know who to engage as we tried to innovate, as we tried to make change happen. So it was really helpful to know what kinds of questions we should ask everyone in the organization to figure out who these people were, rather than the traditional model of going to the executives and saying, who should we involve?
Yeah, that's great. Christian, I want to bring you in really fast. So Beth was talking about what got her excited about O&A. Let's talk about how DecisionWise is looking at engagement from the bottom up as well, just so that we can set the table about why it's important that we understand what's going on throughout the organization, just not at the top level of the organization. We want to understand what's going on at the manager and individual level as well.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be really helpful context for the conversation today. Is we're definitely very excited about what org network analysis is and what the potential it brings to helping organizational development and HR practitioners kind of better understand what's going on in the organization and plan and support the right areas, those types of things. But in the context of our conversation today, it's helpful to think of it through what we're doing in terms of engagement and how we're working to measure, understand, and improve employee engagement. So kind of, as Justin mentioned, that's one of our key areas of focus here. And you heard him even mention that our podcast is called the Engaging People Podcast. You'll hear us mention engagement and engaging as often as can, because it's really the mission of our organization. And so our approach is not only to measure it and understand, okay, what are the opportunities at the organizational level, but really how is it impacting down even to the frontline contributor, the individual contributor at the front line. What is their experience? What do they have to engage with? And how does their experience filter into the larger organizational picture? And so when we measure engagement, we're cutting it by the organizational structure. And I think we're really excited to talk about how we can add to that organizational structure with the informal networks that develop more organically at the same time.
So Beth, let's go right into it. Let's dive into, explain to our audience what this organizational network analysis is and why this is important.
Great, happy to do that. So this is our working definition and why we feel it's so important to engagement, as Christian was just talking about. We feel like organizational network analysis provides visualizations of social networks and the key influencers in them in order to strategically increase organizational engagement and effectiveness. Rob Cross would often use the metaphor of an X-ray when he talked about it. And I love that because an X-ray tells you about the health, and from the outside you cannot see what's going on. But you can, by asking certain questions of the whole organization, determine how information is flowing, how collaboration is happening.
Great. And Christian, when we look at this from a perspective of back to engagement, how does this definition tie into, we have increased organizational engagement and effectiveness. Why is this, let's just revisit that. Why is this critical to that whole engagement component?
Well, I think we're going to get into some really key points for that in a moment. We'll look at that in greater detail, but high-level ideas of one, we want to know who's influencing the flow of information so that when we want to make adjustments to the organization to improve and support engagement, we know the key players that are going to help us be successful. Another key element that we'll speak to in greater detail is that often your communication nodes, those who are people are going to most frequently for information, are exhausted. It is tiring being the center of attention. Just ask me. No, it is exhausted being a communication node. I would not claim to be one of those, but the fact where those intersections where people are constantly going to them for information, for help solving problems, those things, it's a powerful role, but it can also be one that's depleting and can negatively impact engagement. So it's useful information as we look at the entire engagement ecosystem.
Great. And many of you have probably heard about org network analysis, and you've heard of these two different forms. There's active and there's passive. Right now, I'm hearing a lot about passive. So you have companies cropping up that look at analytics. They look at email, collaboration platforms, your calendars, your phone, to kind of see how information is flowing, how people are working together, what employees are doing. There are some concerns with this. A lot of people have privacy concerns. They feel like it's kind of Big Brother surveillance, but it does give you an idea of how information is flowing. Also, you often have to do some kind of technology implementation to be able to track that collaboration. What we're focused on is active ONA, and you do this through surveys. We do a lot of surveys at DecisionWise. That's one of our expertise areas. And so we have questions designed to determine who these key influencers are and what role they're playing in the network. That helps us then to consult with organizations about how they can increase the health of their strategic networks.
So, Beth, is there one better than the other, or it's just that we have two ways that we view ONA, one from an active and one from a passive? Is one necessarily better than the other?
I think they're complementary to each other. However, for our purposes, I think active definitely is better because we're trying to figure out who do people go to for information, for example, or who actually is getting things done in the organization. Who do you see as a role model? Those are things you can't get from just passively observing how information flows.
Yeah. And I would add that the active, more direct approach, I think, is a little more accessible for most organizations, at least initially, in terms of it would be tempting to say, hey, let's implement a technology solution that will help us always be capturing this data and giving real-time input, but it can maybe threaten some psychological safety if I feel like, well, they're paying attention to which meetings I'm going to and who my emails are going to. They're, logging different, some of my electronic footprint and things like that. That might be a really positive approach for many organizations, but I think they have to build to that. Or it has to be really aligned with who they are as an organization where that type of thing would be palatable. I think the active approach, while the two complement each other, I think the active approach, going directly asking a survey, is a little bit more readily accessible for most organizations. Yeah.
So in there, Beth, you talked about the influencers. So let's spend a little bit of time on influencers and what that looks like in an organization. So
this is one of the graphics that I saw a lot as Rob Cross was teaching me about this. This is one of his graphics. I'm using it to illustrate that we have these organizational hierarchies like you see on the left, the org chart. We're used to that. But what happens as you study ONA is that often the people at the hub or in the middle are not the formal leaders. Sometimes they are, but often they are down within the organization. And that's, again, why executives don't know who they are. And so it's really important to go to many sources in the organization and figure out, like I said before, who is your information source, or who is providing you mentoring, who is helping you to get ideas pushed through the organization.
So with this, part of this challenge is we need to know who these people are, right? And with with most of our engagement surveys, and we talk about we're doing the active approach to this, where a survey is confidential, right? When we go through this org network analysis, how do we approach it? Because it is important to know if Christian is that influencer. We want to know who that is by name. Maybe address that level of confidentiality just for a minute, and about how we use names and not use names, and talk about that a little bit.
Great.
Christian?
Sure. Oh, I get to use my favorite consulting response it depends. It depends on how we approach it. There are some real considerations that need to be discussed up front for how this needs to be managed. Because especially if you're going to ask questions like this in the context of an engagement survey, where confidentiality is a top priority, where it's a non-negotiable from our standpoint. We assure confidentiality. We want to protect individuals and build trust within organizations. And so within a traditional survey, an engagement survey, if it's a component, we might separate it out and say, after you complete the engagement survey, now we're going to move into another portion where they can ask questions, and we include text of how the confidentiality expectations might shift a bit with these O&A questions. Another approach, and this is interesting, it gets into some of the complexity of setting one of these up and running it effectively, is which pieces of the O&A information should be confidential? Because let's say we work in the same company, and we do. That works out well. If I say Justin is one of the top people I go to for information, that response is a response, and that part has less confidentiality concerns than who said that. If you say, well, now we know Justin is an influencer, if you say, well, now we know Christian is influenced by Justin, that is suddenly going a little bit further into the identifying the individual. And so those conversations need to be handled up front around, okay, what are we comfortable doing? What are we trying to accomplish with this org network analysis? As well as what type of reporting detail are we going to approach. Another approach, as I'm bombarding you with options, would be let's separate the O&A survey from the engagement survey completely, which is another approach we can facilitate. And let's have this be a standalone exercise, a very short survey, and have it separate and distinct from the engagement, just so there's not that same kind of confidentiality confusion that we might encounter. But it's a key point. I saw that we had a question even come in saying, are you identifying people by name? It's a key consideration. We don't want to damage an organization through a survey. And so that's one of the key concerns as we set this up to run one the right way.
I will say, in my experience with it, identifying people that are key influencers is pro-social. Okay. People aren't that concerned about doing it. I have clients that are asking me to do it after the survey too, as they are thinking about change initiatives. Helping an organization become more engaged is a change initiative. And so they want to figure out who should we involve in that. And so sending an O&A survey out at that point is a great idea.
Yeah. So Beth, what is pro-social? Just make sure we're all on the same page. When you say pro-social, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's a positive thing. Mm-hmm. It's something that people want. So if you're being identified as somebody that is disengaged, that's not great. Mm-hmm. But if you're being identified as somebody that's having a wonderful impact in the organization, that's pro-social.
Great.
So it's not hard for people to say, oh yeah, this person that helps me so much is doing a good job.
Yeah. Great. So we set out to do the organizational network analysis, and we understand that there are certain things that we want to understand specifically from the org network analysis. Let's talk through a little bit about some of these questions that O&A can help you answer.
Yeah. We've got just a few sample questions here. Who drives? I'm going to actually adjust my screen a little bit so I can see this a little bit better. Who drives change? Who are the experts in the organization? Who are the role models? how engaged are the key influencers in our organization? And there's some analysis that can be done on the back end there to give some insights without identifying individuals or violating confidentiality in an engagement survey. Which employees are overloaded? This idea that some of our nodes are overutilized and depleted. How would you retain, how would attrition of influencers impact organizational networks? How influential are our identified hypo population? This is a fascinating area that a lot of organizations are discussing with us. We've identified our hypos. What does the org network analysis tell us about these high potentials? Are we aligned in our assessment of who has high potential with who the organization is going to for information, for support and problem solving?
Can I just add one thing there? As I've worked on identifying high potentials, one of the things that's been a little hard for me is that it feels so subjective. Mm-hmm. But this makes it a more objective process. Usually it is a criteria that this person is able to influence change, to influence people, to develop people, right? And so having something like this helps you understand more objectively if you're choosing the right people.
Right. So it can be a really valuable component for that decision and identifying those high potential folks. Who should mentors be? We ask questions. We can ask questions in an organizational network analysis around who do you go to for career advice? Those types of things to understand who's shaping career decisions and where natural mentors might be emerging. Who are our innovators? Is there diversity in our networks? This is a fascinating area to consider. Does that diversity represent our formal organizational structure too? Are people finding workarounds informally to get information because they're more comfortable seeking representation from diversity they're not seeing in their formal org structure? Some interesting things to discover in diversity throughout organizational network.
Can I add one thing there?
Please.
So I've done quite a bit of work in the diversity and inclusion space. And there are a lot of studies that show females, for example, aren't as included in decision making for various reasons. And so I think that's one area where we could see if that's going on or not with this X-ray of the organization. Are women in your organization, are female leaders in particular, that I've seen a lot of studies on that, being included in some of the key decisions?
Yes, it's a really fascinating area, and this just adds to that conversation in a new way that I think many organizations aren't taking advantage of yet. How influential are our formal leaders? Now, this is an interesting area. Is our informal network completely separate from our formal network? Does our hierarchy have influence within our employee population or people seeking workarounds? Who should we involve in key initiatives? Now, this is an interesting one, especially for me as I work with organizations following engagement initiatives. Now, I'm sure many of the folks on the call or in the session here have gone through the engagement survey and said, okay, now we're going to form action committees and try to improve key areas. Well, an org network analysis can help us understand, well, who are the folks that might help us in these types of initiatives? Specifically, I'm thinking engagement, but this is for any change initiatives. In fact, a lot of the org network analysis work that's been done is being done around change initiatives. Who do we involve to help make these initiatives a success? Org network connection to employee engagement. Well, I was already speaking to this. The informal influencers have a significant impact on direction, alignment, commitment of the organizations. And one of the point that I think is interesting on this slide, and this is something that Beth identified in her research and her work as well, is that, and as well as the companies we've piloted this with, that most executives often incorrectly identify them. If you ask leaders, even HR leaders who have a real great sense of the pulse of the organization and kind of a feel for what's happening informally already, who the influencers are, often they're wrong. I don't know if we have a stat specifically on how frequently they're wrong, but they're not selecting the people that they are actually identified as informal influencers. It's pretty fascinating, and that's a useful gap to close. You think it's this way. Here's the reality of how information is flowing, how careers are being shaped and change is being influenced. That can help leaders be more impactful, make better decisions, pull the right levers.
Yeah, and earlier I talked about doing acquisitions at Oracle and how we really didn't know this talent coming in. So that would be one situation where this would be particularly valuable. But there's a lot of complexity in organizations. The manager that I was reporting to, her name was Kristen Hansen, and she was doing a dissertation on complexity theory. And basically, without going into too much detail, all organizations are self-organizing systems. So there are things going on that we don't know about as formal leaders. And if we don't tap into the informal things going on, then we're really not in control of our organization.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. We do so much work in engagement and in organization level surveys, and in those cases I've mentioned, people give us their hierarchies, and we like to say, you give us your org structure. Now with ONA, we can give back your organic structure as well. So we can say, you've given us what formally is happening. Now we can show you a little bit more of an X-ray, to use Beth's and Dr. Cross's metaphor there, or a comparison. Of what's happening under the org structure and how this information is flowing. It's really interesting. Going, I think, a little bit further into how this plays into engagement and how we work with organizations to help improve engagement, and how ONA is a powerful tool in that in our approach. It's helpful for us to kind of revisit what we call our this screen calls it the building blocks of employee engagement. We call this our organizational engagement maturity models. We're talking about organizations are at different levels of readiness to drive engagement throughout their organization. And so I won't go into crazy detail here, but we have 5 levels, so actually 6 if we count passive engagement. We're not doing anything to actively measure or improve engagement. But most organizations starting the journey on engagement start at a measurement level, where they're just ready to measure, take action, and communicate results. They move up as senior leader buys in and leadership buys in, and we get additional commitment up to where we're ready to cascade through our management structure, through our managers and frontline managers, those types of things. But ONA has a place in this, where we've got, you'll see on the commitment level of this model, we have find and engage informal influencers. We wouldn't recommend for organizations maybe their first year out going into engagement to go completely nuts with org network analysis, but certainly as you build a more robust approach, especially organizations over a certain size perhaps, it starts to become useful to let's understand who else needs to be involved in this, and where we are maybe creating disengagement by overutilizing some of these informal influencers and things like that. And so it has a place in a larger strategy, and it fits in very well to help us consult or create a more complete engagement approach.
All right, let's keep going with how this connects to organizational effectiveness. Beth, you want to take us on this?
We've been thinking a lot about all of the implications, as you can see from our list of questions. Christian and I were looking at different research and discussing how these people, especially those that we're calling experts, or the ones that you go to for information, are often overloaded and therefore disengaged. At first, that was somewhat surprising to us, because when you're involved in meaningful work, we know from our engagement research, you tend to be more engaged. But what's happening is they're being tapped so much from externals and internals that these people just cannot handle the workload, the stress. There's burnout happening. So, this is something that we're really trying to pay attention to, because we care so much about engagement. Also, think about it organizationally. If these connectors leave, then you're actually affecting the whole social network that relies on them. So there are going to be gaps in your process flows and your information flows. So it can be very detrimental. And actually, I included another slide, the next slide, to show you one study that was in HBR recently. And you can see from this chart that there were 20 organizations that were researched here. And these people on this chart were seen by colleagues as the best information sources. And so you can see those that are on the upper right are the best collaborators and information sources. The size of the bubble is their engagement and career satisfaction. So if it's smaller, that means they have lower engagement and career satisfaction. So obviously concerning that these people are, as you can see from the title, in demand yet disengaged, because these are the people that you need to keep most in your organization in order to be effective.
Christian, let's come back full circle. We've had people join the webinar who weren't on earlier. Let's go back to this employee engagement as a 50-50 proposition a little bit. The organization has to can only do so much, and then the employees have to do some as well. How is this impacting these individuals and their ability to both choose to be engaged and actively become engaged.
Yeah, it's, one of the things I tell executive teams when I'm presenting their engagement results and giving them advice on where to go from there is that they can't create engagement directly. As an organization, you cannot build engagement directly. You can create an employee experience that the employees choose to engage with. So there's this element of choice in there. And so think about these influencers that Beth has been speaking about that are depleted, overused, exhausted. And if they're informal, then they're often not receiving recognition for all their hard works because they're kind of doing this under the radar, supporting and creating connections and things like that. So that is the experience that this organization is creating for them to choose to engage with. And they might choose to engage with it for a while, but over time, what we're seeing is it's hard to sustain engagement when we're carrying so much of the weight and it's going unrecognized. And there's, it's kind of all resting on a few key people to keep things moving along.
Another thing we've been discussing is how it can be engaging for others in the network if you redistribute the work that these key influencers have. So it's going to take some of the burden off their shoulders, give it to other people, so you're increasing the engagement overall as well.
Great. And I think that's critical, and why we at DecisionWise want to make sure that this is tied to engagement. The purpose of what we're trying to do is to help individuals engage and create engagement from the ground up, right? We really believe that managers have a direct impact on that engagement. And if they're overloaded, like this graph shows, they're the ones that are looking for other opportunities, and that can really put a drain on our engagement. So let's take it. We've kind of given the history. We've looked at the background of your research and what we've been doing. Let's talk about how we brought this into DecisionWise now and what we're looking at with DecisionWise.
Yeah, so obviously we've mentioned that one of our expertise areas is administering surveys. And so we've been fine-tuning our ONA surveys, trying to figure out which questions are going to help us best identify informal influencers and the type of influencer they are. That makes a big difference as we do consulting and try to figure out how to make the organization more effective and help people be more engaged. And then we have data visualizations. We're actually going to give you a tour of some of those to help you understand the power of these x-rays of the organization, so that you can then think through, well, where do we need to do maybe some targeted training so they understand how to engage others. Again, if these people are those that others are going to most often, there is emotional contagion, so that there's some morale that affects others, but also they are the ones that need to have the skill sets. They need to have the competencies that help others engage. So they need to be able, just like formal managers, to engage people around them. We also can do coaching, executive coaching with some of these individuals. And I've spent a lot of time inside organizations, in HR, in organizational effectiveness. And I was always thinking about, where do I put my coaching dollars? I think this is one of the places you would want to put them. These are people that you really need to both engage and help be more effective.
Beth, I'm going to stop you right there because this is something that you talk about all the time here at DecisionWise. We often think about coaching. We want to find that manager who might be struggling, and we want to coach that manager. And you're like, no, we need to be coaching these people who have the greatest influence, and we want them to be bigger, better, stronger kind of thing. Let's talk through that just a little bit of why that's so important.
Sure, yeah. So I often have people come to me and say, I want you to help this person perform better. And yeah, so there's a place for that. I think usually it's the manager doing good performance management. Those people that you think are really struggling performance-wise might not be the people you want to invest in. They might be the people you want to leave the organization if they can't improve. Where you really get ROI is if you're thinking through, who are these key people in my organization? And sometimes they are executives, and we often do invest in coaching for executives. But I also have been saying, as Justin is alluding to over and over again, we also need to find out who these informal influencers are, and we need to make sure they can be successful. So maybe an executive coach can help them think through how to decrease their burden? Do they need to delegate more? Do they need to figure out how to mentor others to lessen their burden? Coaches can help with those types of things.
Great. So we have these targeted coaching that we can do. Is there a way you can see who's having a positive influence on the organization and who might be having a negative influence on the organization? Like, is it all one way or the other, or is it from what you're showing before we get into kind of the maps? Is that possible to see both positive and negative influence?
It is, but you have to think about that approach up front. So, for example, one of the areas potentially to explore with org network analysis is role models, right? And who's influencing and shaping this. And this is an area where we, at least in some pilot, we were able to go through and say, here are role models, but we stopped short of saying, are they positive or negative role models? Are they role models that are role modeling the organizational values and behaviors you're interested in? Are their efforts and their influence aligned with the strategy and the direction of the organization, those types of things? And so you really have to be deliberate in terms of, are we asking questions that not only surface who's influencing, but also who's influencing in the direction that we're comfortable with? And so it is part of that survey design conversation up front. Are we just looking for influencers in general, or are we trying to capture positive, negative, or aligned influence?
And as I've been researching this and thinking about different questions, I think what Christian is saying is so true. You have to really be thoughtful about the questions you ask. You can positively frame things. So, for example, one of the kinds of influencers we are trying to discover are the energizers. So who gets you excited about new ideas? Who creates a positive work environment? I mean, use that word in there. Those types of questions are definitely going to get you to those that are having a positive influence. How effective is my typical interaction with this person? If you then distill it down, you get the list of names, and then you could ask more questions about the types of interactions.
Great. So I've heard you guys talking about different types of people that we're going to get. I've heard you use energizers. We talk about role models and mentors, as well as experts. Is this something we can get from one survey, or do we have to do a specific survey for, let's find out who the energizers are? If we want to understand what's going on in that organization and who these people are, how do we bucket those individuals, and where does that come from?
The ones I'm seeing most commonly in the literature are the expert. Who do I go to for information or to solve problems? I'm also seeing this role model or mentor come up a lot. So who, aside from your manager, who do you go to frequently for career advice and mentoring? Those types of questions. And then also this change agent, really that's the way this has been used most, as Christian said. So there are a ton of questions about being a good change agent. However, I really believe that we need to be consultative and ask people, what are you trying to measure? Yeah. The survey's not going to look the same for every company. They need to figure out what initiatives do we have, and therefore, what kinds of influencers do we need to find?
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, actually. So in survey design, it's not the same set of questions for every organization because they'll all be a little bit unique, right? Is that a fair assumption?
Yes, and I think we can design a survey that measures those three areas together. If that's the direction we need, we can go deeper into one or the other. But there is some customization. It really is. Let's begin with what you're trying to accomplish on the back end and design an instrument aligned with that.
So having the data is one thing, right? It's really cool to see the data, to gather that data. It's one thing. Let's talk about now, what do we do once we see this? What would an organization do in terms of either best practices or next steps? How do we not isolate somebody, or what would be some good next steps that we'd want to take?
Well, one that comes to my mind is figuring out where those bottlenecks are. One of my biggest concerns is where you have got key influencers that are overloaded. And so check in with the people that are at the hubs of the social networks and make sure they're doing okay, provide them the support they need. Look at network efficiency. How could you redistribute the workload, streamline processes, things of that nature? I do think that helps other employees. I noticed there was a question about how do you help other employees so that they're not feeling apathetic as these key influencers get all the attention. I don't think it needs to be that way. Just like with high potential programs, yes, there are certain people that you're going to give privileges or special development options. However, you're going to, of course, look at the whole network and say, how can we give some of this really meaningful work to other people? How can we involve them in this and help them understand how they can engage more fully?
Great. Christian, does the size of the organization matter? Like if we want to, if somebody wants to look at their organization, if they have 100 employees or if they have 100,000 employees, does it really matter? And what might be some differences between the size of a company when looking at an organizational structure like this?
Well, one, they'll need a bigger monitor to view it. And by the way, I sell monitors. No, it can become unwieldy very quickly. And so I think there's some technology solutions we can do to say, okay, let's create some filters so it just shows certain levels at a time and things like that. But I saw one question come through that was kind of around this, and if we have a large organization, and some of our largest clients are the ones most interested in this. We also have some sub 100 companies that are interested in this as well, and so it is a different approach, and it comes back to being a little bit more deliberate on the front. What are we trying to accomplish? Are there areas of the business we're more interested in this information? And then if we're measuring this across 100,000 plus person organization, how are we going to break it down so that a human being can make sense of it? So we can deliver the information in different formats as well. So it's fun to see a visualization like that. Like I mentioned, I think spatially those things, but it can also be limited in terms of how much we can process at a time. Versus if we put it in a ranked table or something like that, we can say, here's a list of your top 10 influencers in every division or something like that. Suddenly that's much more palatable and actionable. If for large organizations, if we're dealing with this, we can make sense of the data and ship it out in a way that's going to be a little bit more appropriate. And so again, it comes down to what are we trying to accomplish and how do we shape the output accordingly.
I'm seeing lots of questions about whether or not you should recognize these people. My opinion is that you should, and this is similar to my philosophy on high potentials. I think you should tell them, and that's actually helpful to them in their engagement. Plus, it's usually known. Like people see that they're getting special development and things of that nature. So yes, it's a very positive thing for these people that are role models or change agents to be brought in by executives and to be told, we want you, because you're so valuable to this organization, to be involved in these key initiatives. Again, you can do too much of that. These people are already in high demand. So you have to figure out how do we redistribute some of the work they're doing so they can be involved in these meaningful organizational initiatives.
Great. Beth, let's revisit that for just a minute, just to make sure that we're clear. We talk about the role models and the experts and the energizers, the change agents. Mm-hmm. How do we identify who those people are? We've had a couple questions come in about that. Let's just revisit that for a minute. And how do we identify who those people are, either based off the survey or results? Kind of walk through that again, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Yeah, so again, it goes back to designing a really good survey. But there are people that tend to create a positive work environment that know how to energize people that they work with. So really asking people what interactions are like with those people. Do you feel energized after a reaction with that person helps. Certainly with change, there are a lot of ways that you can see if they are change agents, meaning they're getting work done. Ideas that they have are being accepted, right? This might be somebody others go to when they have an idea that they need pushed through the system. So just getting those questions right so that you're identifying the different aspects of these key influencers is important.
So tactically, when we do a survey like this, what's the best approach? We ask the question, who do you go to for information? Or you guys know the questions that you ask better. And then do they just type in a name? Or how do we do that tactically to make that process simple?
Yeah, so one of the reasons we've gone into this recently, one, it's interesting, it supports the work we're doing, but it also is a natural next step for us because we capture a lot of data from an organization when we do their engagement data. So we have their hierarchy, we have their employee list, And so when we go this one approach is, since we have their employee data set, it's select from a list there. We'd have that preloaded in there so that I'd start typing Beth and her name would show up, and I'd say, Beth is someone I go to for information.
Thanks, Christian.
I'm sorry. I wanted you to find out here.
You feel special.
It's 100% true. And so we can make it so it's a selection there. Another approach, and to add to the complexity, is we could say choose your top 3. And that gives us another level of detail. Choose your top 5 or whatever is appropriate for the organization. Then we could create some kind of aggregate score based on some of those things. But it also gives you a little more depth in saying, okay, marketing doesn't talk to operations until 4th level down of connections. So what does that tell us about are we siloed? And so there are a few different ways to approach it. I could geek out more than you'll want me to, but that's how we would do it in terms of, I like to say, let's have a preloaded list there just to control for variables, as well as when we do engagement, we also have the luxury of having all the demographics coded, so we can do the cool things like diversity and inclusion, as well as other demographics, tenure. How are our millennials looking for information versus other generations, those types of things, even all the way up to Justin's generation.
Oh, thanks. All the way up.
All the way up to the far end of the range there. No, but we can so if we pre-populate a list for them to select from, we have the luxury or the advantage of being able to align or map the other data sets to those names kind of for the work we do.
Well, guys, this has been a fantastic conversation. Really appreciate this. Any last thoughts that you might want to have on organizational network analysis and before we end tonight?
I'm really excited about it. I haven't been this excited about a research project in a long time. I feel like the seeds were planted at Oracle, but since then I've been many other places, and I've seen how important it is to figure out who these people are. I've done a lot of research with people like the positive organizational psychology folks at the University of Michigan, and I love their philosophy. It is that you look at positive deviance, you look at what's going well in the system, and you say, why is that going so well? Let's dissect the learning from that, or let's find the best practices from this person or this group, and let's apply that to our opportunity areas. I've seen organizations be so much more successful as they do that than the traditional way of looking at what's wrong.
Great.
Yeah, and I'll add the same sentiment that I am very excited about. This is one of my favorite directions, the best area. Someone just asked, what generation does Justin represent? We'll give it. That's part 2 of this podcast. That's part of our premium package where we go into the details of our own demographics. But I will say I am very excited about this direction. I'm excited about the amazing work that Beth's done in this already. I'm very excited because it aligns so much well with the work and the technology that we've already got in place. And I think this is another way to give HR meaningful strategic data where they can make more informed decisions, better support the people in their organization, give leaders better advice and things like that. And so it's coming together nicely. I think we're just barely scratching the surface of what's possible here, and those organizations that were the kind of early adopters, people we're working with here, have been great partners in helping us define where we're headed with it.
Great. And because of the generation comment, I'm going to open an invitation. Anyone that's out there, and I know that you guys are open to this, but anyone that's out there that if you have questions about where DecisionWise is headed with ONA, and if you have questions about how that might impact your organization, please reach out. And Christian and Beth would be more than glad to talk to you about what that looks like and how what opportunities exist, how you might impact your organization with this. Is that fair, guys? Are you okay with that?
Fair enough.
All right, good.
Well,
thank you all very much for joining us today. Hopefully this has been of value to you. Please continue to watch for additional webinars as well as more information about ONA as we continue to roll this out and strengthen it in the industry. So thank you very much.